Good day and welcome to PPM's July podcast. My name is Joe Becker and I'm the owner of Paramedical Personnel at American Heart Association Training Center. We were incorporated in 1990, so we've been over 30 years teaching CPR and first aid for the American Heart Association. As such, we have over 500 instructors based out of this training center, and we literally are an international hard to say sometimes, international corporation in that we have instructors all over the world teaching CPR. And today's talk is going to be on automated external defibrillators, the AED. And what you're looking at in front of you right now is ventricular fibrillation. This is the primary rhythm that AEDs were designed to stop, to stop the heart from ventricular fibrillation. This is what it looks like on the monitor, and this is the primary rhythm that the AED is in fact looking for. Okay, let me back out a little bit here. And now you got me in the picture. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is not only for our instructors to listen to and add to their classes, but also for the lay general public, because so many times we hear about things like automated external defibrillators and don't really understand what they do. Everybody tends to think that you shock a person and you're restarting the heart, and that's not exactly true. In fact, when we shock the person, we are actually stopping the heart. We're bringing the heart to standstill with a very large and powerful shock. Okay, for our instructors, we'll go over what we hand out to our students, and certainly available to you if you contact us via our email at Paramedical Personnel of Maryland. We will send you out a copy. We'll email you a copy of what we call our cheat sheet, which has all the same information that we hand out to our students. And the first thing with AEDs is if it's water. If you get a person out of the water, like out of a pool scenario, begin CPR, towel the person's chest off. The person doesn't have to be totally dry, but where you're putting the electrodes on the patient, you don't want that whole area to be wet and cause what they call a water bridge between. Metal surfaces, they want to be on a non-conductive surface. If they're on a conductive surface, like a metal deck, you got to put something under the person so that they're not on the metal deck. Otherwise, the shock will go from the upper right pad or the lower left pad directly to the metal deck and not through the patient. So that's why the non-conductive. Transdermal medication patches. What if they've got a medication patch stuck right where you need to put the electrode? Well, you need to take that off, wipe that area, and then put your electrode on. If you put the electrode over top a medication patch, you will actually shock through the patch and burn the patient, and typically a second-degree burn right off the bat. Implanted devices. In the old days, most implanted devices were on the left-hand side. That's not true anymore. A lot of them are on the right-hand side. Some are even in the abdomen. The ones in the abdomen cause no problem whatsoever. But if in fact the implanted device is in the upper right-hand side, remember you need to put your electrode just a little bit to the right or to the left of where that implanted device is. And you'll see that in males, you'll see a lump under the skin. In females, you'll see the little scar mark where they put it under the muscle tissue right there. So in females, you won't necessarily see the big square, but in males, typically you do, okay? Hair, what if they're a hairy person? All your AEDs come with a kit, and the kit has a Bic safety razor in there. And we'll talk about something that is still actually in some of the videos. They talk about putting your first patch on, and if the AED says not making good contact, that you rip that patch off, and that will take the hair off. Well, in the old days, that was true. The old AED patches, the electrode patches, were so sticky that once you had that on your patient and you ripped that off, it was like waxing the patient. It took off all the hair. But the newer AED pads are not that sticky. They're sticky a little bit around the edges. The center is mostly gel to make contact with the skin. And so you're not really going to remove the hair with an electrode patch anymore. They are working on a hair removal patch that we're waiting to come out on the market. When that does come out, then I would recommend everybody put those in their AEDs. If anybody here has prepped a patient with a little Bic safety razor, it is not an easy chore to do, and time is not on our side, so the quicker the better. In hindsight, though, and many of the times when I've actually put pads or electrodes on a patient, it is rare that even on a hairy patient that it fails to read, and typically it always shocks. So it is rare for it to fail, even on a hairy patient. Okay, infants and children, it can be used on an infant and child, and we'll go into that a little bit further down the line here. Okay, that's from our cheat sheet. And again, that's available to anybody that wants it. Just get in touch with us, and we will go over that. So let's talk about the AED in general. The AED really was not invented just yesterday. It's actually kind of an old device, and we'll get more into the dates. But an AED, literally when you open it up, some devices will turn on automatically when you open the lid. Some you have to push the on button to turn them on. But the bottom line is they will tell you what to do. They will tell you where to put the patches on, to put the pads on, etc. So once you turn it on, the device will start talking to you and tell you what to do. Kind of train you in how to apply the AED. Simply put, one pad goes in the upper right-hand side over here, always the upper right-hand side. The other pad goes 6 to 8 inches down from the armpit on the side of the patient. Now, how do we come up with the 6 to 8 inches down from the armpit? Well, when you're thinking that these devices were basically designed for the lay general public, that's the other part to our audience out there, how do you tell somebody where to put the other pad? Well, simply 6 to 8 inches down from the armpit is a good spot. You can kind of figure that out, okay? Once the pads are in place, it begins to read the rhythm. When we put the pads in the upper right and the lower left, then you're actually creating what they call a lead 2 presentation. Lead 2. Lead 2 presentation is what the AEDs were designed to read. That's why it's so important to have upper right, lower left. If we have the pads reversed, the device will say no shock advised because it cannot read the rhythm. It can only read the lead 2 concept, upper right, lower left. That's why we use that. Okay, which creates a problem down the field. Originally, when they were telling people on a child to put the pasties front and back, because that's not a lead 2. The newer AHA videos are now saying upper right, lower left. Okay? So, as long as you got it in those positions, the AED is capable of reading an EKG and looking for that ventricular fibrillation that you saw, that I showed you right off the bat. Once it sees that rhythm, it will tell you shock advised. Okay, you want to make sure that nobody's touching the patient. It will arm the AED, and the button will light for you to push the button to shock the patient. Before you push the button, make sure you say clear, and literally take that second to look around to make sure that not only is no one touching the patient, but in some cases the patient is not touching one of your providers. I literally had a case in point where I said clear and looked up, and the classic thing everybody does is they put their hands in the air as if I'm clear. And I said to my one team member, I said, "You're not clear." And he said, "I'm not touching the patient." I said, "No, the patient is touching you." And the patient's arm was literally up against this guy's kneecap. He was in shorts, so it was literally right up against the bare skin. Had I fired off the AED, I would have shocked not only my patient, but also my teammate. So really take that second to look around, make sure no one is touching the patient or in contact. We had a nurse the other day that was shocked because he was actually touching the gurney the patient was on. Remember, gurneys are on 4 rubber tires. That's kind of like 4 insulators. And since he was hanging on to the gurney, he became the grounding rod for that shock. And so that's how he got shocked. So remember, when you say nobody touching the patient, clear, you literally got to take that second to make sure that really the environment is safe for your team as well as your patient before you push that shock button. Okay? So it tells you to shock the patient. You clear everybody, and you quick push that shock button. Now, in more recent aspects, they've actually come out with a fully automatic external defibrillator. Now, in the old days, they used to yell at us for using that term, automatic, because they used to say it's not automatic, it's automated, because you have to push the shock button. Okay, makes sense to me. However, later now they've come out with a fully automatic. The full automatic will warn you twice. It sounds a little siren that it's going to shock, and then it shocks the patient. The logic behind the fully automatic is that people were taking too long to push the shock button. In some cases, 90 seconds from the time it said shock advised and it says shock, and you see the little light blinking, 90 seconds from that point before somebody finally pushed the shock button. Okay, so the question was, why? Are we not teaching this correctly? The reality was, it was kind of like you push the button, no, you push the button, no, you push the button. Everybody was scared to death to push the button. Okay, and by the way, people do not jump off the table like you see on television. In my entire career, I've seen a couple little muscle movements in shocking, not leaping off the table like you see on television. Television is incredibly incorrect in almost everything they do medically. Why, I don't know. For example, they're always shocking a flat line, or what's called asystole, where the heart has completely stopped. What did we say AEDs do? They stop the heart muscle. If the heart's already stopped, i.e. asystole, flat line, there's no shocking the patient, because a shock does not start the heart, a shock stops the heart. Okay, now back to logic. Why are we stopping the heart? Well, the heart is a unique muscle in the fact that any muscle fiber of the heart can tell the heart to beat. Kind of interesting when you think of it that way. However, the problem with that is if different areas of the heart say, hey, let's beat over here. Oh, no, let's beat over here. No, let's beat over here. Well, then the heart goes into chaotic activity, and it's kind of flopping around like a bowl of jello. That's ventricular fibrillation. So the heart is quivering. The reality is, since it's quivering, it's not pumping blood. Remember, to pump blood, it has to have top beat, bottom beat, top beat, bottom beat. That's what pumps the blood through the body. Okay? Its normal electrical system has two pacers in it, and you may know this, may not know this. But the very one in the very top of the heart, okay, my little heart here, the one in the very top of the heart is known as the SA node. We won't get into all the terminology, but SA node, and is the major triggering heart for the heartbeat. It's one regulates the heartbeat. The second one is about midway down in the heart, almost centerlined, and that's known as the AV node. And so what happens is the SA node fires electrical pulse down, that collapses the top part of the heart, then that triggers the AV node to fire and trigger the bottom part of the heart to collapse. So it's top, bottom, top, bottom. Okay, so kind of neat. So when we literally shock the heart with a very high DC voltage, we're bringing the heart to standstill with the hopes that literally the SA node will begin firing again in a normal pattern. We've knocked out all the chaotic activity, and we'll get top, bottom, top, bottom. Okay, that's the whole theory behind this. If we can actually shock the patient within the first few minutes of the cardiac arrest, thus that's why we activate 911 right off the bat for an adult, because the odds are for adults, they will be in that ventricular fib. Okay? So if we can knock that right off the bat and get that AED to the scene, then our success rate is extremely high. As a matter of fact, if we look at the numbers here, we're in the 90-some percentile within just the first few minutes of the cardiac arrest. And that's pretty neat. That's up to 6 minutes. At 9.5 minutes in the cardiac arrest, we're still in the 90 percentile still. When we get into the 10 minutes, we're at a 50%. Okay? Now, this is with CPR in progress. So basically, remember, with CPR in progress, we're still circulating oxygenated blood through the heart muscle. So we're keeping the heart alive with CPR as well as the brain and the other body organs. But it's also important to keep the heart functioning and alive. So with the heart being still functioning biologically alive, the AED still works extremely well. Like I said, up to 50% success rate, and in some cases as much as 14 minutes. So that's really kind of cool. However, in some cases, the responding unit could be as much as 20 minutes or more away. So CPR is so important, along with the AED. Okay? Okay, so when was the AED first around? There's some debate on this. It looks like the actual first AED was first developed and used back in 1899. How about that? That wasn't just yesterday. That was a few years ago. And it was by Jean-Louis Provost. Pretty interesting. And Frederic Batelli. They're both physiologists from the University of Geneva in Switzerland. And they were the first ones to realize that a small electrical current induced into the heart would actually cause ventricular fibrillation, and a slightly larger charge would actually stop or reverse the ventricular fibrillation. Okay, pretty cool. Back in 1899. How's that grab you? That was a few days ago, huh? We always tend to think these things were like just yesterday. Yeah, no. Okay? I'll talk about that in just a second. The first closed defibrillation was in 1954 by William Cohoven and William Miner, and then the process was improved upon by Paul Zoll And Zoll was one of the manufacturers for the AEDs as well as for defibrillators in general. And the first closed chest on a human was 1956. So that was a few years ago. Let's see, 1956. I was about 7 years old. Interesting, huh? They said the first modern AED was invented in 1978. Okay, that makes more sense because in 1975, when I started riding the ambulances for English Council Volunteer Fire Department here in Harford County, we did not have AEDs. And it wasn't until a few years well after that that AEDs actually came into the state of Maryland. And I was in charge of the American Heart Association committee that brought AEDs into Maryland. And we had a full-size committee. I mean, quite a few people in that committee that worked with rules, regulations, how we were going to bring this to all the different fire companies, how it was going to be used, all the rules and regulations. So it was in depth, and it took us a while. And what's interesting is that we had two factors involved in stopping the AEDs. One was they believed that the BIC safety razor that came with the kit, that came with the AEDs, was a possible threat because people were going to steal those BIC safety razors and rob people with them. When we pointed out that you can get a BIC safety razor from any 7-Eleven, didn't make a lot of sense to worry about holding up an AED. So literally it wasn't until they threatened to cut federal funding that all of a sudden AEDs were welcomed to the state of Maryland. So interesting enough, Maryland was not one of the early states that actually used AEDs, brought AEDs on board. It was quite a while before AEDs were accepted into Maryland. And then we had to go out and teach everybody how to use an AED. So our committee went to hospitals, doctors' offices, colleges, and showed them this is the AED, these are the trainers, this is how you teach the program. And even back then we had issues with people would buy AEDs, the real thing, and then hide them because they were so afraid somebody was going to steal them. But the early AEDs, the very first ones out, were around $10,000 a piece. That was a little pricey. Okay, now they're around $1,000, and in some cases less than that. So really, they're not that expensive when you think of having one in your office place. Should you have an AED for your home? Not necessarily. You know, occasionally we get people at our classes will say, you know, well, we bought one for our Uncle Fred's because he has cardiac problems. And my comment is, well, does everybody in the house know how to use the AED? And they'll say, oh, but Uncle Fred lives alone. Well, an AED is no good for a person living alone. They need the implanted device. You know, all your pacemakers now are defibrillating pacemakers. So he needs the implanted device, not one that hangs on the wall if he's living by himself. Okay, let's go some more things here. How much volts does this thing actually deliver? And that's a question that comes up from time to time, especially if you're teaching a group of electricians. But the voltage is around 3,000 volts this thing delivers. 3,000. That's pretty hefty shock. But it delivers it in a microsecond, actually 0.001 of a second. So although it's a very high voltage, it's delivered extremely quick. Okay, so yeah, and it is enough to knock you down if you are in contact with that patient and not hands clear when that shock is delivered. Okay, I've heard people say that it's like being hit with a 2x4. In my career, I was very lucky, knock on wood, that I was always clear when either I shocked or anybody else shocked. So that is good. Okay, let's talk about, we talked about success rate. Let's see what else. How many times can you shock a person? That always comes up. Well, as long as the person remains in ventricular fib, you can still shock the patient. The problem with that is that two issues here. One, the longer a person remains in ventricular fib, the harder it is to get them out of ventricular fib. So that's a problem. The other thing is with each shock, the shock becomes less effective to get them out of ventricular fib. So at some point, typically you're not going to be successful by shocking them. And in most cases, what will happen is they will transit from a ventricular fib to an asystole and stay in asystole. And at that point in time, it's back to CPR and at that time drugs to try to get them back into a coarse fib and then back into a shockable rhythm and try to convert that. So that becomes more advanced life support at that point. But again, the key to all of this is the fact that AEDs work extremely well, and that virtually every business or company should have AEDs. Now, do we sell AEDs? No, we don't. That was approached years ago when we first started about selling AEDs, and the reality is I don't want to see us as somebody hawking a product. I don't say, oh, this one's better or that one's better. All AEDs do really the same thing. You don't really need all the bells and whistles. That makes them more expensive. You just need something that can analyze the rhythm and shock the patient. So inexpensive is the name of the game. Okay? All the ones we use now are using DC voltage, not AC voltage. And that was kind of a shock as doing my homework, is that early on they were using AC voltage in the very beginning, and then realized that DC voltage is much better. Why DC voltage? Well, DC is polarized, positive to negative. So it sends the voltage one direction. Our muscles in our entire body are all DC voltage in a way. They're all positive, negative charges. So it works very well. So DC is the voltage of choice, so to speak, for our defibrillators. Okay, let's see what else. Beginning part. You come in with the AED, you put the AED on the patient, but remember, AEDs are only placed on a patient that is non-responsive, no breathing. Okay? Because if the person's breathing, they got a heartbeat. So non-responsive, no breathing. Okay? And you would kind of think that everybody knows this because that is part of the training, but we've actually had people tell us that they put it on somebody that was talking to them. It's like, yeah, that's a no-no. AEDs are only applied to a person who is not breathing and non-responsive. Okay, so we got that straight. Okay, let's see what else we got here. What also pops up is, how can I get one of these things for free? And in today's world, we kind of know nothing is free, right? However, believe it or not, there are organizations out there that will actually help you with this. And if you go online and look for public access defibrillation, and there are several groups out there that you can actually get money, or they will pay for your AED. Now, typically things like church groups and stuff like that, you can actually get a free AED for your church group by looking this up and applying to get an AED grant money to buy your AED. Then where do you go for your AED? Go online, buy from a reputable place. In many cases, you can buy directly from the manufacturers themselves. The outfit that we use, that we are not connected to in any way, shape, or form, we don't get any money from, is an outfit called AED Superstore. And we stumbled upon them years ago. They've only gotten bigger, which is kind of neat. But they sell all the different makes and models. And so you can go online there, you can look up all the different makes and models, see which one is the best price for you. You can also contact them directly and talk to them about the AEDs, and then they will help you get the AED that you have chosen. Okay? And then remember to give PPM a call so we can come out and train you how to use the device. What's interesting is some of the AED companies will train you on how to use the AED, but guess what? They don't train you on how to do the CPR. Case in point, we had a guy come in, he missed his company's training for the AED. We said, well, AED is part of all of our CPR classes. It's part of our heart saver, it's part of the basic life support. It's core material, it must be taught. So he said, okay, so he came in and we did the CPR class, and we did the AED for him. And then I said to him, well, when is your group going to get renewed in CPR again? And he said, oh, they were never trained in CPR. And I said, well, what do you mean they weren't trained in CPR? And he said, well, they were trained in how to use the AED. And I said, but at one point the AED says, after the shock, it'll say check for pulse or check patient. Patient's not responsive, begin CPR. I said, how are you going to begin CPR if nobody in your company has been trained in how to do CPR? And he just looked at me with the blind stare of, gee, never thought about that. Okay, so yeah, you really need to be taking CPR and the AED training together because they kind of go hand in hand. The other thing too is when you get your AED, remember I said before groups were like hiding the AED, they're afraid they're going to steal it? Well, the AED has to have access to all your employees, everybody. So there are boxes made that you can actually put the box on the wall, put the AED in the box, and then people can get the access to the AED at different times. The boxes can be alarmed, so somebody opens the box, it sounds like a little alarm to draw people's attention to it. But the reality is it's then available 24/7 to anybody in the plant. You don't want somebody to buy an AED and lock it up and goes home at 5 o'clock, and there's the AED locked up in a desk drawer somewhere, and somebody at 11 o'clock at night needs an AED and can't get to it. So think through not only getting the AED, but having the proper training so everybody's trained how to use the AED, and then where are you going to put it that's convenient for everybody to be able to grab the AED and get it to that patient right off the bat. Okay? One of our instructors stumbled upon the fact that the company had bought like 5 AEDs, had the AEDs actually in the boxes in the plant, and the reality was they were still in the cardboard box they came in. So nobody actually had access to the AED had they opened the cardboard box. They had to put the thing together. So again, think through. Feel free to call us anytime. We certainly will act as a helper to give you some advice on this crazy stuff. And if you're going to buy one, we're certainly there to help you set it up and get everybody ready to use. Okay, that's pretty much everything. And I hope you kind of had a little bit more of an understanding of how AEDs work and the importance of an AED. Because it really makes a difference as far as saving a person early on in the cardiac arrest. Okay? Again, my name is Joe Becker, and any questions, please get in touch with us. Our phone number here is area code 410-838-8821, and hit extension 1. That'll get you right to the front desk, and they can usually answer your question from there, or they'll follow it down to where we got to be, and we'll go ahead and answer your questions. Okay, again, thanks for coming, and thanks for watching the podcast. Be safe out there.